episode is sponsored by Raise Tech, end-to-end IT solutions for your business growth.
Hello, everyone. This is On the Agile Couch, and today I have a lovely guest, Cliff Berg. Hello, Cliff.
Hi, thank you. Good to meet you.
Yeah, this is fourth season, so and the season actually almost ends. So I'm so glad that we can have a huge guest, which we will talk about, of course, Agile things, but with a bit of additional spice. So we'll talk about Agile 2. But first, maybe you can introduce yourself, Cliff, because I can, read about you from the somewhere from the World Wide Web, but maybe you want to highlight some more or the things which you would like to say.
Yeah, so just real briefly, so I guess the most noteworthy thing is recently I put the team together that created Agile 2 a couple of years ago, right during the pandemic. It can be done. And we then wrote a book, Agile 2 book. Interestingly, that entire book was written by 7 people and edited and got through production and into printing by Wiley in 3 months. In 3 months.
Nice.
So that's Agile. And in terms of my background, I'm an engineer. I've been an electrical engineer, industrial engineer, and nuclear engineer earlier in career. And I've been involved with IT. I actually tried to get out of IT many times, but I kept getting pulled back in.
You never can go away, once you started.
And one of those times, in 1995, a colleague and I created a company called Digital Focus that just took off, and it did really well. And from that experience, I ended up writing a book called High Assurance Design, because we built stuff that really had to work. We built customer-facing systems, core business systems for FedEx, McKesson Pharmaceutical, Capital One Bank, United Overseas Bank. Lots. I wouldn't remember them all. It's been many years, but the stuff really had to work and it had to be secure. I organized some security conferences. We flew in the CTO of VeriSign and a bunch of firewall companies and had, because the stuff really had to work, but we had to do it in an agile way. We had to build quickly. The work we did typically, we did everything fixed price, which is not considered agile, but it can be depending on how you do it. And that was before the agile movement. And the thing is, we built things quickly. Generally, the time horizon was 3 months, from start to finish, to build and deliver something that worked at scale. We had our own performance testing lab that I ran. And this had to be rock solid, but it had to be done quickly. And it had to be done in a way so the customer was constantly getting feedback so that we got it right. So we figured out how to do that before Agile. But then when the Agile movement started, we embraced extreme programming to try that, and that went well. So we continued that. But then the tech bubble burst, which was real disappointing because we were just about to do an IPO. So, oh well. But then anyway, so I got very involved with the Agile movement. But from early on, I was concerned that the Agile movement was kind of off-center, because there were some core ideas that were the right ideas, but they weren't quite right. They were close, but not quite right. And also the Agile community, just kind of as, culturally within that movement, was very dismissive of the need for design and architecture and security and things like that, and reliability. Things have to work. And the community was not interested in those things, and it needed to be. The problem to solve was how to be nimble and quick and make stuff that really works, that you can count on, that you can put in an aircraft, system, or in a banking system, where if you have an error in a banking system, regulators come in, and you lose horrible reputation if things don't work. So stuff has to work. And the Agile community was just dismissive of that. Let's deploy it and try and see what happens, And so very early on, I reached out to Scott Ambler because he was one of the few people writing about Agile who also seemed to understand stuff has to work. And it has to work in a complex context where you have a large organization that has lots of products, not a product, but lots of products, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of products. And they have to be harmonious. They can't all look like they came from a different company. So how do you do that? That's the hard problem. Having a team building a product, I don't care about that. That's easy. I could do that in my sleep. The hard problem is how do you have a big organization that builds lots of things, touches lots of different kinds of customers and makes stuff and is still nimble and is still able to move quickly and the stuff works. That's the hard problem. Anyway, that's answer your question about
Yeah,
my
but
background. That's my focus. That's where my focus has been.
Yeah, and I think it's all real nice that you even mentioned, what problems you saw during this movement and what I guess you try to fix by Agile. Is that right?
Well, Agile 2, the impetus for Agile 2 was, for a long time, a lot of people have felt something's not right. The Agile movement kind of shook us up and said, wait, because during the 90s, the 90s was where things went wrong. Before the 90s, I was on lots of projects that were highly Agile, but we didn't have a name for it. It was just, good project management, and we didn't have frameworks and so on. Generally, people just generally didn't use processes. You would join an IT project, there was no process. And today people look at me like, what? How can you not have a process? Scrum gives you a process. You need a process. No, you don't. You actually don't need a team level process. You don't. None. You don't need any team level process. What works in effective teams when you don't have a process is there are people who take on the leadership role, either it's assigned or this is what they do. And they ask questions, how are we going to do this? Who's going to work on that? How are we going to get that done? What if this goes wrong? How are we going to make this happen by this time? Because that's when needs it, and they just figure it out and they just do it. And they're constantly talking about it and how are things working here and it just happens, and it all comes down to people having effective leadership skills, either just naturally because it's how they are or because they've learned it. But that's what you need. And, that's what makes it really work. And if you have that, you don't need any process. You kind of create a process just innately, but it's just the process sort of evolves in how you do. And people might decide, oh, we need to organize how we're doing this. Let's create a list. Oh, we can call it a backlog maybe, but who cares? So the processes evolve, but you don't need to start out with anything. But, to answer your question about Agile 2, during the pandemic, I and lots of people had been thinking for a long time that things weren't quite right. I've been writing a lot of articles about Agile for years, and I discovered there was a huge silent majority that felt things weren't right. People who weren't speaking up because they thought, maybe I don't really understand it, or maybe, they weren't sure. Maybe they just didn't want to get involved in a discussion about it. But I would write articles that were very controversial, and there would be hundreds of comments saying, I've been thinking that, but I was afraid to say. Like that was a very common response. And people have come up to me at conferences afterwards, in-person conferences. I gave a talk in Madrid and someone came up afterwards and said, I'd been thinking about that and I was afraid to say that, so what she said, and I hear that a lot. So it's not like all of a sudden we realized change was needed. It was clear for a long time, like from the beginning, that it wasn't quite right. it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just, it wasn't quite right. And it was missing key ideas. And so when the pandemic started, the pandemic forced us to face the issue of, does everybody have to be in a team room? And guess what? We found out, actually, it can work quite well if everybody is like not together in a team room. You know, that doesn't mean there aren't advantages. You know, there are pros and cons.
Oh yeah.
It depends on the people too. It depends on the individual. Some people work by talking with others. That's how they think. One of my business partners, Lisa, I mean, now she's moved on to other things, but that's how she is. You know, she has to talk things through. That's how she thinks. Other people are neurologically different. There are other people who they don't think while they're talking. They need to go off by themselves and go into their head. And if you put them in a team room, you basically destroy their productivity. You know, so it depends on the individual. And when the pandemic started, we realized that here, you know, it kind of is proving that the team room is not always the best solution, that things can work in a different way. Doesn't mean it's better, it's different. And we thought, you know, maybe this is the time. It was actually Lisa and I who put the team together. You know, we recruited 15 people and we were very intentional about it. We wanted it to be culturally diverse and global. We wanted to be gender diverse. We created a table of the skills that we wanted people to have: product design, program management, engineering, system engineering. You know, we had a whole list of experience and skills. And then we had two criteria, kind of behavioral mindset criteria. One is that you had to have demonstrated through your writing or speaking publicly that you think for yourself and don't just repeat the standard narratives. You have to have demonstrated that you're willing to say things that are controversial. And the second criteria was that you could not be deeply invested in the current status quo. Like if you operated a business as a Scrum trainer, that would have been disqualifying because you have a financial interest in that established paradigm. And we recruited it using LinkedIn. We found 15 people, actually more than that, but we kept it smaller. And we then started in a very inductive way. We had lots of one-on-one discussions in which we took detailed notes and published those in a Google Doc, in a Google folder. We weren't able to have a meeting with everybody because of the time zones. But we did lots of FaceTime with little groups, you know, just a few people. And we created a Google folder, we created a Slack channel, and what else? There was a third one. But anyway, it turned out what people ended up using surprised me, was email. And, you know, through that process, we derived about 100 what we called key ideas. If at least two people mentioned the same issue, you know, we called it a key idea. And then we grouped those into what we called problems or insights, I think. You know, if the key idea was, you know, such and such doesn't work because, you know, or what we really should do is, then that's an insight, you know, and that was the reason. We always preserved the reason, the thought process.
So can I ask, so it was more to all of those people which was picked in this group, so they thought what is not working or how they seeing a better way of working, which then you added as idea, is that right?
Yeah, and you know, the initial attempt was just collect what people thought, not try to organize it and not try to put it into some kind of structure or anything. We just, you know, key ideas where if some idea, whatever an idea is, an idea can be something doesn't work because, or we should be doing this because, there has to be a because.
Yeah.
But those were identified as key ideas. And then we distilled those. When we had actually, there's another step we took is because there's so many people, and we didn't want this to take 10 years, we defined, I think, 5 topic areas, like leadership and I forget what they were. It's actually, we have it all. I could look it up, but because we documented all of this. But and then people signed up for topic areas that they wanted to participate in discussions about. And that's how we kept from blasting emails to everybody. If you're interested in a certain topic and someone mentioned something, it was shared in that or that Slack channel, and there's a document created for it. And as issues surfaced, we created documents for those issues too. And people could then write their thoughts in there as comments or as document text, or they could just respond to emails. And I was hoping they'd use the documents mostly, and they didn't. They ended up using email. And so I had a huge task, and I had to collect what everyone was saying from all these different communication methods, move them all into documents, issue documents. So I was constantly transcribing, copying, and trying to organize. This is related to this. I became like the organizer. Hugely time consuming, but it was the only way. And then once we had everybody's idea, and we had discussions about like, well, what is leadership? There's a lot of research on that, but I didn't want to, have people bring in research models and so on and like precondition their thinking. I wanted their raw thoughts, and so we actually derived kind of like a leadership model, the kinds of leadership. It's posted on the website. And then afterwards, stepped back and looked at how does that compare to what has been studied and researched and published about leadership. It's actually like the same. Like it's not different at all.
You didn't reinvent the wheel, so the wheel was already there. You just confirmed that, okay, that's what is actually needed.
Yeah. So just to kind of close that up, so we then distilled, after we had talked through, so the 2 most contentious issues were about leadership and also the whole introvert extrovert issue about, which is about collaboration and communication. And that was pretty contentious with a few people. And so we just went around and around to try and find common ground. And eventually we did kind of work it through. And then we distilled all that stuff we tried to distill it down, and we ended up with 43 things, which we regrettably called principles. And they're not principles, they're just kind of like idea reminders or something. Because there is no principle with human behavior. There's no absolute principle. You can't. It depends. But we thought, is 43? That's too many. But then when we distilled it further, we realized that we lost the intelligence of it. We lost the specificity, and therefore it made it too abstract and too general and not useful. So we went back. We went back to the 43. And then we decided to publish all the key ideas related to each of those 43 things, so that someone could see the thought process and understand it, understand the intention, which is more important than the actual statement. And then we distilled values from that, but I frankly didn't care about that, but we did it because everyone felt we needed to create values, but the values are so vague, like I value peace, not war. Well, what does it tell you? It depends. If someone invades, you have war, and whether you like it or not. So the values are fine, but I find the principles are where the kind of the real intelligence is that these people created. And by the way, I didn't create it. They created it.
Yeah.
I moved text around and asked questions and made suggestions, but I didn't create that. In fact, what we ended up with was actually the organization we had several people attempt to organize all this and state these principles clearly. And I made an attempt, and two other people made attempts. The one we used was done by Raj Nagapan, which is one of the team members. I did not create Agile 2. It was created by those 15 people. I contributed a little bit, but probably 1%.
Okay. And I like that you mentioned that again. There are like a lot of principles or reminders, if you like to phrase the word. At the same time, I found the Agile 2 in a nutshell. This page where it was mentioned, the only general principle is it depends. So even with those principles, then how to, let's say, what's the best think how to follow them? Do you need to again read all of them and then try to apply all of them, or again it depends and you just choose the things which important in your case, in your area, in your project or environment or whatever? So what's from this side? Because again, one size doesn't fit them all, and I think that's again that really the huge problem which Agile movement when they try to read the original manifesto and look, let's apply blindly to whatever, even not on the software development, which is clearly said it's manifesto for software development. So what's in this Agile 2 case? Again,
Yeah.
it's reminders how and on what to focus. At the same time, look and think by your own. It depends, or maybe it's something different.
I'm glad you asked that, Andreas. That's actually the key thing. That's the key thing. You should not follow any of this. You should not follow the Agile Manifesto. You should not follow Agile 2. You should not follow anything that looks like a set of rules for human behavior. Never. What you should do is use it to help you think. You should use it as a reminder to think it through. None of it is useful unless you already have judgment about these things. If someone doesn't have judgment, they're just, I want to say just out of college, but there's some people who have good judgment already when they're out of college. So it depends. Yeah, it depends. But if you're someone who has very little life experience and experience with people and these kinds of things, and then not good judgment about it, and then you read Agile 2 or read the manifesto, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. Because you don't really understand the intention. It's just like the bumper sticker, peace, not war. Someone who has a lot of life experience reads that and they nod and say, I get that. I know what they mean. Someone who doesn't have experience will read that and take it literally, and they will not understand it, and they will use it incorrectly. They'll think it literally, it's make peace, not war. And then someone invades, make peace, not war. Okay, and so they basically lose their home and everything, and probably their life. So it always depends, and always depends is not a cop-out. What it really means when you say always depends, because it really depends on the situation. And in order to do the right thing, you have to apply judgment. And the Agile Manifesto, for its faults, it still has kind of some good ideas. And, Agile 2, which I'm sure is not perfect either. These things are at best just thought provokers. Don't forget about this kind of situation. Don't forget about that kind of situation. But then you have to use your judgment. And if you don't have the judgment, it's game over. You better go talk to someone who does have judgment so you can make a good decision, because these things are not things to follow. They're just reminders to help you make the right judgment.
Okay. And I think that's again really important to highlight that, and that totally makes sense. And then I think you mentioned if we counting the year after the pandemic, it's already more than 2 years when it was published. Is that right? Does it somehow change?
It's more like 4 years. I think like
even 4 years.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it change or pivoted itself in some direction, or you didn't have this retrospective, after, or maybe you having, but you're still confirming, you know what, that still is the same number of the reminders, and let's not change anything, or how is this going on?
Well, Agile 2 was a retrospective.
Yeah.
The entire process was a retrospective, and so
But are you doing the retrospective now, like after those 4 years, or for
no,
now
we've
you
moved on because Agile 2 describes situations and behaviors, but it doesn't give you any kind of blueprint or like guidance about what you should do. And it also doesn't decompose like the whole behavioral side and delve into like, because in order, so Agile 2 was Agile 2 and 15 people, and that group disbanded, and it published its work and it disbanded. I formed then a small company with a few of them and some other people. And what we've done is, we didn't create any kind of certification and never will. What we did is we asked, what would help organizations to use these ideas and other ideas and whatever is useful. Because, a lot of the consulting that you see around Agile is actually terrible. It's very often, rolling out Agile frameworks and so on. And Agile frameworks are like starting from the end. You should, when you start a project or any kind of initiative, or, to create teams to do something, you should start with questions, not with answers. You should start like, what are we trying to do, and bring the minds together, and what's the best way to do that, instead of bringing in some framework that like gives you like a cookbook. That doesn't work. It's not that it doesn't work at all. It works. It's enough to get things going and put things out, but it doesn't work well, really. It gives you transparency, but it does not make you agile. It makes you kind of brittle and lethargic, and it makes people kind of not really think about what they're doing. It's very unhealthy in terms of the organizational culture to bring in these frameworks. And so we asked ourselves the question. We started with the question, what would help? Yeah, Agile 2 has some good reminders about decision making, but what should people do? And so we don't want a framework where you give them the answer. So we created a framework based around asking questions. So we created something we call it constructive agility. And, the questions aren't all published because that's our intellectual property. But, the essential process, you could come up with your own questions. In fact, there's one of the courses we teach has a lot of the questions in it. But you don't need it. It's just common sense. It's a matter of, how are we going to do this? What are we really trying? And also addressing the things that matter. So, you need to think about, like, if you're creating an initiative that has lots of teams, how do we want people to behave? What kinds of leadership do we want to cultivate? Most of the time organizations don't think about those things.
Exactly.
How do we breed agility? How do we embed it in the thinking? And what does that mean? What does that mean? And so we looked at some highly agile companies to see how they behaved. And we discovered that those companies did not have common frameworks or processes. It's not like they were all using Scrum. No, in fact, most of them weren't using Scrum. And software companies and hardware companies. In fact, it's published on our website. It was Netflix, Amazon, SpaceX, Spotify, and Google. Because those 5 companies each have been very successful at very large scale, but they've also made huge pivots very quickly and effectively. That's where the agility comes in. And we looked at the behaviors of those people. When we were able to, we talked to people who worked there. For 3 of them, we were able to do that. And what we found was that there were common leadership behaviors across all 5. There are actually 12 common behaviors that we identified. And, that informed us on what Agile leadership looks like, and that's what makes the difference, not some process. The people will create the process they need. You don't start with process, you end with process. But you have to cultivate a culture of how people lead, what's kind of the norm and what's expected. And so one of the behaviors is the expectation that people will solve problems, not just do their job. Sometimes to solve a problem, you have to go outside, you have to change your job or go beyond your job or talk to other people doing other jobs to solve the problem. And, in these companies, we found that leaders had a very high expectation about that. And there's a positive and negative. It's like they discover that they're just doing your job but not solving the problem. They become very unhappy. You might get fired actually for not, the Agile community doesn't like to talk about the negative side, but the negative side is actually very important. But it needs to not dominate. The positive needs to dominate, but the negative needs to be there too.
But I totally agree with you, because again, I don't see a lot of talking or just focusing on the things that, again, if we're talking about Agile and you say this Agile, that there are specific focus on specific things, like do a bit more, you have to step outside of your daily things and stuff like that. And so Agile is actually, if we focus on that, it's not for everyone. Like if we apply Agile to the people which worked, like they did before for 20 years and don't want to change, Agile will not be the right way for them. And that's the thing which, again, I think not a lot of people focusing to explain even to the companies which trying to, let's try to shift to the Agile ways of working, but then let's keep all the employees and just focus. That's like we mentioned, just take one of those scale up frameworks and stuff like that, and it should be good. It's usually not.
Well, I did a lot of consulting for between 2001 and 2019. I did lots of consulting and working with at all levels. I found that most people, even in companies where people were very rigid and, no, that's not how we do things. We have to do things how we do. I found that those people were malleable. And if they learned that they were expected to behave differently, they responded. There always are some people who kind of like are inflexible and they may need to leave, but I found that most people will rise to the occasion if their leaders show that they expect it.
Okay. Good. And actually, time flies when we talk about the things which we love to talk about. So I would like to then ask you maybe the last question. You mentioned that you started to post about the things which you noticed that the Agile moves not in the right direction as maybe you would like, and then you created those posts and stuff like that. So what you would recommend to people which listening and then even trying to think, you know what, yeah, that's right, and they maybe even if they will go to Agile too and they will see some which they like, they don't like, how you would recommend to where to start, where to start this change? Because you mentioned your was from seeing, not liking, and then trying to do the some posts or even the speaking as in some conferences, but what you would recommend to others to do?
Well, people are different. Like, I'm a reader, so some people prefer to listen, and that's good too. And people are cognitively different. In fact, there's a fantastic book on that, which we actually used a lot of the material from it by Daniel Kahneman, who passed away recently. He's a Nobel laureate. He's a He was a neuropsychologist, and also, I think, but his Nobel Prize was in economics because he linked behavior to economics. But anyway, his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a lot about how people think differently and communicate differently and why. And but in terms of what people should do, I would recommend that they read about behavior or 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 listen about whatever format is available, that they learn about human behavior and not learn from people who express opinionated things, but learn what the research says, because the research is about real people in real situations. It's not fake. It's the research on that is not just laboratory research. It often is research about what happens in real companies, and also about leadership. There's a lot of research about what happens in real companies in terms of leadership, lots of research. And you can learn, in fact, like Google did an incredible study some years ago on it, about what the effective leaders are. And that's what makes the difference. And good leaders are agile leaders, just because that's part of being a good leader. It's not a separate thing. Companies need to be able to pivot quickly. That's a critical leadership thing today. So you can't really separate. There is no separate agile thing. It's just part of good leadership today. And get out of the agile bubble. Read what is actually available in these different domains, behavioral psychology, and stop looking for certifications. The answers are not in certifications. You won't learn, if I see certifications on a resume, that tells me nothing about what that person knows. I don't care about any of it. I want to know, do they have intellectual curiosity? Do they want to understand these issues? Have they taken a course in some of this at a university where they're learning the real stuff, not opinions? Have they, what do they have ideas about it? What do they think about it? So I pursue the real stuff, not the opinions.
I think that would be really nice talk for maybe the future podcast together with you, because I think it would be really nice to talk with you and discuss about the certifications, because you have a strong opinion about that. And I think my opinion somehow correlates to yours, but as you mentioned, there are different people have different opinions, so you have to listen, try to understand why they saying like that, and then check if you agree or not. But for now, really thank you for this lovely discussion, that you've shared such a great ideas and just in general information to our community. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for listening. So till next times.